Good. I wanted to just hold off for a minute and make sure that school, everybody's ready. I'm not in the middle of something. Okay, cool. Today's sixth grade is here. You heard about me? I hope it was good. We'll find out. Okay, so I need this thing, right? In order for this to work. Cool. So yesterday I talked a bit about 10 points that I thought were important in just thinking about what we're doing with our Lenten time and how to begin that sense of healing and forgiveness. Today I want to talk about memories, and this is largely it's work that was done years ago by the Lynn brothers. Matthew Lynn and his brother wrote a book on the healing of memories. So some of you who are younger, you wouldn't have ever heard of that. Some of you who are older, you might have seen it before. But largely, what I wanted to talk about today is the fact that I think healing begins with evaluating those hurtful experiences for how do we move on, in what ways, what steps do we take in order to move past those experiences that kind of hold us back or stop us in our tracks. As I was mentioning, yesterday I printed my slides lengthwise, so my binder looked like this. Last night I printed them the wrong way, so now I got to figure out how these pages are going to turn to remind me. You know, when you get to be a certain age, reminding yourself what you wanted to say is an important thing. The first thing of healing and forgiveness is to be aware. Awareness is that, you know, what's happening in our lives and being conscious of it, not kind of avoiding it, pushing it away, but being aware of it, kind of maybe at arm's length. I know it's there. Maybe there are things I need to do about that or with that, but at least to be aware that it's there. So an awareness that there are things in our lives that weigh us down or slow us down, or there are things in our lives that we hold on to, as I talked about yesterday, that get in the way of us opening space for God and for love. Okay? The awareness of those things, there we go, often comes down to loss and hurt and various things, right? It comes down to looking at what is the residue, what's the after effect of some of those experiences in our life of loss or regret or hurt, where we've lost a relationship, we've lost a loved one. For those who were younger, it might be that you moved from one place to another, and some of your friends that you were close to are still in that old place where you used to live. And so you kind of lose touch with those people. You lose touch, and then you miss your friends. If you look on YouTube, every once in a while you see those videos where, you know, reunited after 200 years and, you know, oh, it's you, oh my gosh, right? It's being aware of those losses and what they mean, what the residue, what the consequence is in our lives of those kinds of losses. Because when we hold on to those things, it makes us incapable of grabbing the love of God, right? When we're holding on to something so tightly, you know, somebody might hand me something and it's like, sorry, my hands are full. Our hearts are full when that hurt and that loss are so present to us that we can't put them aside, lay them somewhere, and work with those. In the medical model, we treat the symptoms, right? When you go to the doctor doesn't say, what are you feeling and diagnosing? He says, what's the symptom? What's going on? Do you have a fever? Right? Are you tired? You don't have any energy? He's looking for, or she's looking for the symptoms. They're looking for the signs of what's happening. Those hurts and losses can be signs for us in our lives of what's going wrong, what we're holding on to. Where's that negativity? Where's that loss of health? Where's that unhappiness? And awareness is step one, to know it probably has something to do with these things or this area of my life, or it has something to do with this loss, and to be aware of those things, to listen to our bodies. In psychology, there's this new kind of push over the last maybe 20, 25 years of the body and the mind working together. One way you can kind of get an idea of what it means is when you're nervous, what happens, right? When you have to get up in front of the class and you're not sure what the answer is, and the teacher says, come up here. How do you know you're nervous? Maybe it's because you have butterflies in your stomach, right? Maybe it's because you're tight, your muscles are tight. Maybe it's because you're how does your body tell you what the emotion is? And that's one way to be aware, to think about, to feel what is going on in me that has to do with a hurt, a loss, an image, a dream, a loss of a dream, a relationship, a loss of a relationship. What is it that's happening in my life? And to be aware of those things. And to continue to speak about the hurt. You know, a lot of times we're told, you know, we don't talk about that. When I was growing up, my father was from that previous generation, you know, where we don't talk about that. We don't mention that, you know. And that's kind of the environment in which I grew up, that there were things that you simply didn't talk about. I don't think that's too helpful in the grand scheme of things. I think there ought to be people in our lives we can talk about pretty much anything with. Now, we have to choose those people carefully. We have to choose those people knowing what we can trust, what's going to come our way if we talk about certain issues. But we have to be able to have that conversation in order to talk about our hurts, our dreams, our visions, what it is that we want for our lives as time passes. We need to transfer our unresolved issues, passive-aggressive, gossipy issues. Did you see what she's wearing? Oh my God. Look at him. Oh, what happened? We need to be aware of those things, but then begin to say, well, what is it that I'm noticing and why? What's that about? What am I trying to do here? Do I think I'm better than somebody else because I'm taller? Do I think I'm better than somebody else because I'm brunette instead of blonde? I don't know. But to be aware of those things as signs of who we are and what's happening inside of us is important. And to stop being passive-aggressive. Everybody know what passive-aggressive is? Passive-aggressive is kind of like that, the way in which people are aggressive without saying a mean thing. You know, oh, don't you look nice today? Bless your little heart. How do we do that in ways that are mean to other people and yet don't sound mean? I didn't say anything bad. How are we doing that in an aware way where we can look at it and say, wait a minute, that's the part of my being, my personality, my character that I'm not so happy with. Let's see if I can change that. Let's see if I can reduce that. Where awareness can also bring us to look at peace at any price. Some people live that way, right? We cause chaos in order to get peace. We push other people away in order to be peaceful. It doesn't always work, right? It doesn't always work that way. Jesus doesn't say, if your neighbor bugs you, push him away. Ignore him. Don't talk to him. Jesus says, if your neighbor bugs you and drives you crazy, befriend him. Be his friend. What? Jesus, you must be crazy. That peace at any price can be something that within us takes us to a place that's not helpful. And during Lent, I would invite you to be aware of those things in our lives. This morning, in talking about this awareness, I want to share a scripture passage with you. Awareness of the temptations in our lives. Then Jesus was led by the Spirit out into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. He fasted for 40 days and 40 nights. Guess what? Lent is 40 days long. What a coincidence. Or what a coinkydink, either way. After which he was very hungry. And the tempter came and said to him, if you are the Son of God, tell these stones to turn into loaves. But he replied, Scripture says, man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. Then the devil took him to the holy city and made him stand on the parapet of the temple. Parapet's the top part, where for a lot of Catholic churches the cross would be. It's the very highest point. If you are the Son of God, he said, throw yourself down, for Scripture says he will put you in his angels' charge, and they will support you on their hands in case you hurt your foot against a stone. Jesus said to him, Scripture also says, you must not put the Lord your God to the test. Next, taking him to a very high mountain, the devil showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. I will give you all these, he said, if you fall at my feet and worship me. Then Jesus replied, be off, Satan, for Scripture says, you must worship the Lord your God and serve him alone. Then the devil left him, and angels appeared and looked after Jesus. Jesus is aware. He knows what the devil's doing. He's aware. This is temptation. I'm hungry, and so the devil's saying, hey, you could have some bread. Turn the stones into bread. Come on. You know you can do it. Jesus says, no. You're at the top. Come on, God will protect you. No. You could have all this power and authority and fame. You could be more famous than Taylor Swift. And Jesus says, no. How are we aware of those things in our lives that draw us to the wrong side of the equation? How are we aware of those things that slowly take us down the wrong road? And because we're aware, we're able, like Jesus, to say, no, I don't think so. I don't think that's the kind of person that I need to be. The next step there we go. See, it's to that side, not this side. It's actually up there. The next step is through reflection, through reflection is acknowledgement. Acknowledging, the page didn't turn, it went back. Acknowledging and remembering, even if we're not aware consciously, hurts affect us. Those things that have happened in our past, they're still there affecting us. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and he had just, he's had the worst luck in the world in his romantic relationships, you know. Every time he thinks he's in love and he's in a good relationship, something happens and the person leaves him, you know. So he was saying, you know, that this new woman I'm with, she says she's getting punished for all my previous relationships where I became jealous and I'm asking questions too much. And I said, well, you think that's possible? No. And I said, well, probably, because you're not saying, I'm just concerned in this relationship that, you're saying, who is she? Who is he? Where? How did you meet him? That's how the conversation is going. And so he's not letting her know what's taking place. He's asking questions and wondering why she's going, no, quit asking questions. You're jealous. I'm not jealous. Yeah, you're jealous. How do we acknowledge for ourselves that those hurts still impact us? And because of some awareness, because we're looking at it aware, consciously, awake, we know this is something I need to watch out for. This is something I need to pay attention to, ultimately. Acknowledgement means, acknowledgement means naming the hurt and the pain. As humans, one of the things we try to do is we try to keep all that stuff at arm's length. I'm not looking over there. Too much pain. I'm not going there. But if we're acknowledging, if we're aware of it and we're acknowledging it's real, that's just real, right? That's just what is. That's just what I've been through. Then naming it. What is it? Is it a loss? Is it a hurt? Is it something else? What do we name that thing? When I teach my my seminarians, I mentioned yesterday that I teach at the seminary at Oblate School, I give them a list. Now, you have to remember that seminarians are all guys. Yeah, I know girls. Guys, right? They're all guys. I give them a list of emotions, and the list of emotions is very long because there's all kinds of ways to talk about I feel sad or I feel happy, I feel mad, I feel glad. There's all kinds of ways and words to use. So I give them a list. The majority of the guys in the class, when you ask them, how do you feel? They have 4 words for it. Hi. They have 4 words for it. Mad, sad, glad, or afraid. Well, what does that mean? They don't have that long list of words in their heads. They only have those simple words in their heads. To name something gives us power. It gives the thing power, but it gives us power because we know what it is. We've examined it, right? We've looked at it and said, okay, that's what that is. Let me use an example from, just a moment. Let me use an example from video game, right? How do you know in Fortnite whether that thing on the hill across from you is a player or a tree or a bush? I'm not asking for an answer. I'm saying think about it. Okay? How do you know? Well, you have to pay attention. You have to name it. You have to look at it and say, yeah, it's not moving, so it's probably a tree or a bush. But that doesn't mean there's not somebody in the bush. There could be a player in there. But you have to look carefully. That's what I'm saying about these hurts and things. By naming them, by looking at them carefully, we get a power, an ability to identify how that's impacting us. Wait a minute, because I can barely hear. He's asking about my name in Fortnite because I said yesterday what my name was. It's one word. It gives us a power, right? Think about, for those of you who are older than Fortnite age, think about what is that thing? And once we know what it is, it gives us a way to say, okay, do I keep it? Do I get rid of it? Is it a bug? Is it a dead bug? What is it? If we don't know and we're just kind of, what is that thing? It's much more difficult to control it. It's much more difficult to control our reaction to it because we're not sure what it is. If it doesn't move, that's good. But if it's moving, I'm not going over there. We do the same thing with hurts. We do the same thing with past events in our lives where we don't name it. We don't get close enough to examine it. We don't have the ability to use it to our benefit as a way to understand our lives and how God is present in our lives. Because sometimes we stay away, right? That thing, that memory, that feeling, I'm not going there. I feel angry. I feel betrayed. I am as mad? No, should be I am mad. I'll take that out before I make the copies, otherwise I look foolish. We have to name it and know what those feelings are around it. Now, this is probably an observation of an older person, but I think women do better at that naming of feelings thing than men do. They have a better vocabulary for that. Men, we got to get on top of that one and really be able to differentiate what being happy and being ecstatic and being over the moon, what's the difference? Because we're more likely to say, when the wife says, how are you? We're likely to say, happy. How was your day? Good. What's happening? Nothing. Right? We don't have the kind of vocabulary we need. So being aware and naming what's happening to us and what's in our conscious memory is important. It's one of those things that really helps us to get ahead of the game. The next important piece is dialogue. We need people in our lives that we can dialogue with, that we can talk about with, that we can say, you know, I've discovered this part of myself. I've discovered that whatever, you know. The example I gave yesterday where I was right as a 7th grader isn't still helpful to how I acted. I was right, but it wasn't helpful. It's hard to see that though, huh? When because you think, well, I was right, so I must be right. I was right in the facts and wrong in the behavior. That's what is. But being aware of that and talking to people about it is what really gives me the opportunity to work with it, the opportunity to use that knowledge, those memories, as a good thing, as an advantage. I know. There we go. Sometimes we feel like a victim, you know, there's nothing I can do. I see that at the seminary when because I'm a psychologist, I tend to look at things and describe them, you know. I tend to, you know, be one of those people who's like, well, this is what that student looks like. And then sometimes one of the other teachers will say, you know, well, there's nothing we can do. The bishop's going to ordain him anyway. And I say, well, maybe. But I'm going to put on paper my observation just in case it doesn't go well, and then they have to look at the file, and the file will say, somebody said this guy wasn't going to work out as a priest. And then I'll feel better about saying what I need to say in an appropriate way, and not just going, oh, well, whatever. Sometimes we need to name it, we need to acknowledge it, we need to be aware of it, and we need to work with what is that thing in our lives and how can we either overcome it if it's bad, change it if it's bad, or how can we use it as a motivation if it's good. And sometimes motivations are not comfortable. Sometimes there are things in our lives that we need to overcome, but that overcoming becomes something that is helpful to us. Dialogue changes us from victim to I have something to say. But I'm also called to listen. You remember, dialogue is at least two. So in addition to my talking about the things I discover about myself, my relationship with God, my character, my personality, I also need to be the kind of person that listens to others. I need to be available to people, available to listen to that same dialogue in them. There's a fancy word for that in Fortnite. It's called calming. You have to calm, which stands for communicate. Awareness and acknowledgement can take a long time. It's not something you walk out of here and you go, you know, Father Brian said this, and I just think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, and I'm going to start doing it 5 minutes from now. I wish it were that way, but it's not. And I'm already getting one smile in the crowd saying, yeah, I hear you, right? It's a process. It's a process. And it takes us time. We have to change. And then changing becomes that thing where the people around us go, what's wrong with you? You changed. You're not like you used to be, right? I'll tell you an inside secret. I very seldom wear the collar. Because I teach psychology mostly, I wear shirt and tie when I teach. Yesterday, when I was on my way here, I happened to run into one of the seminarians in the parking lot who looked at me and said, Father Brian, what's wrong? And I said, well, nothing. He said, you're wearing your collar. Where's Praveen? Because he would say the same thing. Praveen will look at me and say, well, I see you're wearing the collar. What's wrong? Because almost everybody sees me as shirt and tie, or if they see me in a more informal way, I'm a t-shirt and jeans kind of guy. It takes time. Change takes time, and change takes awareness. I wear the collar yesterday and today because I'm doing priestly stuff. And so I become aware, okay, this is not a psychological thing. You're not there doing psychology. This is not a psychotherapy session. It's not a shirt and tie. It's a collar moment, because that's the role you play. What's our role in our Christian life? How do we follow Christ on a day-to-day basis? We need to be aware of what we're doing, how we're acting, what's happening around us, and it takes time for that to work. It's not an overnight process. Dialogue can facilitate the next step. When we talk to other people and they hear us and we feel heard, that's important. I want to give you a quick way to think about what it means to be heard. Have any of you ever had the experience where you're talking to someone and they're looking at their watch or they're texting on their phone while you're talking to them? And what happens in your head? Uh-oh, there's some knowing smiles out there. People who've experienced it. You feel like they don't care. Is that anybody else's experience? You feel like they don't care? Yeah, well, hi, I'm right here. Our dialogue, our awareness, acknowledgement, and dialogue means we have to be with that person. We have to be zoned in. Multitasking is not going to be that helpful in interpersonal relationships. It's not going to be that helpful when we're trying to be present to another person. We have to be kind of, okay, well, let me put that thing down and let me pay attention. And when we do that, how does that feel when we do that? When the person puts down the phone over dinner, turns it face down, ignores it, does it feel different? Do you feel heard? Do you feel attended to? Do you feel affirmed? Nobody's sure. Okay, that's a good sign. Yeah, I do. I don't know about y'all, or because we're in Texas, maybe I don't know about all y'all, but I do. I appreciate it when somebody whom I'm out to dinner with puts their phone down on the table face down and ignores it. That tells me they are purposely making the decision to spend time with me, and the rest of the world will leave a message and they'll call back. How do we do that in our dialogue with each other? How do we do that in our dialogue about our faith life? Do we even talk about that? When I was growing up, there was this thing called Jesus freaks, right? Are you a Jesus freak? Because people would talk about their faith, and you go, oh, my gosh, here we go. I'm not saying, trying to turn me around, but I'm saying when we talk about our faith with other people of faith, the dialogue is important. The dialogue itself makes us feel accepted and cared for. The next step is acceptance, and that comes through dialogue. It comes through us talking to one another about what we're experiencing, maybe the hurts that hold us back, and allowing other people to be a part of the healing of those memories, to be a part of the healing and the change in our lives. At least I think so. Because I know as a human being, it's important for me that when I talk to people about faith, that they're zoned in, that they're dialed in, right? I can't tell you how disconcerting it is, how kind of deflating it is. When you're celebrating Mass, and I've had it happen, and I'll say, Lord be with you, and there's like one voice out there going, boo. Well, there's like 400 people in the church. Is anybody awake? Is that the experience we have in conversations with other people? Right? How are you today?
Fine.
What's new?
Nothing.
How you been?
Great.
There's no content. Through dialogue, we feel accepted. And because we share about those things in our lives that might be a little bit problematic, that might hold us back at times, and people still listen, that acceptance is even more powerful. We notice it more because we say something that we're afraid to say, or we think might be a difficult thing to say, and people still accept us. There we go. To accept an event as a reality, to accept what's happening in our lives. It's real. It doesn't mean we have to say it's good, but it's real. Because so often in our lives we say, no, that can't be right? That can't be the thing. It's got to be different, right? So often in our lives we try to deny what's real, and then because of that, we end up in this place where we can't really work with it because it's not real. We've kind of blinded ourselves. We've taken off our glasses and said, I don't know why things are so fuzzy. They are because we're not paying attention to what's happening to us, who we are in the eyes of God, and what that means in our faith lives. Well, part of my personal history is this acceptance piece. I mentioned yesterday, I think it was in the morning, but definitely in the evening, that I was raised in a family where my father drank a lot. My mother was the typical kind of If you don't stop, I'm going to leave. If you don't stop, I'm going to leave. If you don't stop, I'm going to leave. If you don't, after a while, it's like, look, you're not leaving. Stop saying, right? Stop it. You're not going anywhere. You know it, and I know it. So growing up, I had to do a lot of things in order to say to myself what I wasn't getting from them, to affirm what I was doing as the right thing because I wasn't hearing it from outside. That's an important piece. That acceptance is an important piece, to accept myself. This is the way God's created me. This is where I am. That's where I've been. What do I make of that? Consciously, aware, acknowledging. It's not easy. Acknowledging it wasn't easy then. But because of focusing on those things, because of saying, this is what it was, and this is how I need to overcome it, and this is what I can count on from the people around me, from my friends, from their parents, from school, from God, I'm able to come to an acceptance and the ability to hold, the ability to accept myself, to accept that it happened, that my life isn't like everybody else's, and that's okay. Because not everybody has the same set of parents. Not everybody has the same kind of experiences. Our experiences bring us to understand life as me, who I am. And in that, what is it God saying to me? What is God telling me about my life? What is it God is telling me about human nature, about my relationships? Many of the people that I grew up with, I'm still in touch with because of the previous step. Because of that step. Because I talked about it and said, this is how it's impacting me, and I need to find a different way to do this thing. Because the way that I'm tempted to do it just isn't working. I need to do that differently. Because of the dialogue with friends and family and others, saying this is the reality, and it's an uncomfortable, or it's a reality that, as I mentioned yesterday, to my parents' generation, we don't talk about that. Because of the dialogue, I'm able to say that's what is. That's what I overcame. And to know how I'm overcoming it, and to know how I'm aware of how it's impacted me, and to know how God can use that to help me be better at what I do every day, right? And this is the opposite of begrudging. Begrudging means like, no, it's not a big deal, right? Instead of begrudging it and saying, well, it's just what is, it's just what everybody goes through. Okay, so what? It's what's called grist for the mill. It's something that helps me to look at what my life is like, what's important to me, what it means. After we found awareness and acknowledgement and acceptance, then what do? I found this, I like this one because my seminarians always laugh when they see it. You know, I have a couple of those, like the one I showed yesterday. The first 40 years of childhood are the most difficult. This one's kind of funny. What are our choices? We can very easily repress it. We can very easily say, no, it doesn't exist. No, I'm not looking, you know. La, 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 I don't want to know. We don't want to face the hurt. We don't want to face the loss. We don't want to name it. We don't want to acknowledge it. We don't want to say, that's real in my life. And so we repress it. But two things happen when we repress it. Number one, we can become passive aggressive. And then we explode. Only heaven knows why. All of a sudden, somebody's having a bad day and they go, yeah! Right? Blah! That's one possibility. We can approach it from a very passive aggressive kind of stance. Or we can be depressed because it's overwhelming and we don't know what to do with it, and it's just kind of sitting there. It's just a big rock in the backpack, and now our back hurts, and all we want to do is complain about our back hurting and not really look at the rock that we could take the pack off and take out and go, hey, I don't need that. Awareness, acknowledgement, dialogue, acceptance. Or we could desire forgiveness. We can desire to forgive. We say a prayer all the time that I think we miss sometimes what it means. Our Father art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread and forgive us our trespasses. Oh, shoot. As we forgive those who trespass against us, God's going to judge me the way I judge other people. I'm in trouble, man. I am in trouble. You know why? Because I judge people. That one's good, that one's bad, that one's too tall, that one's too skinny, that one's too fat. God's going to say, Brian, at the pearly gates, we got this list of people you were judging, and here are the criteria that you established. This is the ruler you used to measure, so let's see how you measure up. I'm in trouble. When I desire to forgive, I'm not using that measure. I'm not using that. You're not like me. You're not the way I want you to be. You're not doing the things I think you should do. I'm using a measure of, that's who you are. God, work with that person. Help that person. God, be kind to that person. That's what turning the other cheek means. It doesn't mean, okay, hit me again. It means step back and say, okay, that's what it is. Maybe I need to be a little further away when I'm with this person, because that way it'll be harder to reach me. But I'm not going to just ignore. I'm not going to judge. I'm going to be forgiving. We want God to forgive us. We go to confession, oh, Father, forgive me for I have sinned. And then we go out of there going, great, now, how long until I sin again? Right? How long until I get, oh my God, I did it again? How are we aware and acknowledging and dialoguing and accepting who we are and those things in our lives that get in the way of our being good people, and forgiving other people, forgiving ourselves. The forgiving ourselves part is the harder part. That's the part everybody kind of goes, ooh. Can we try that again? Because it's not easy. Because we have our own memories. I live in my own skin. I live in my own head. Right? And so, forgiving myself, I'm not so sure. Do you think that God would say, forgive each other, turn the other cheek, be forgiving, and then say, by the way, I'm not going to give you any grace to do it with, so just go do it? Not sure. I don't think so. I think God would say, look, I'm going to give you the grace, but you have to pick it up and use it, right? I'm going to give you the mats for your build in Fortnite, but you got to use them. I'm going to put the tree there, the rocks, you can hit them, but you got to use them. God's going to give us the grace. God's going to give us the grace to be forgiving, but we have to forgive. We have to figure out how we're going to say, I need to be more accepting of that person. Even the parts of the person that I don't like, even the parts of the person that I'm not so comfortable with. I got to be comfortable with the person, right? Even if they're too tall, too short, too skinny, too fat, I've got to be comfortable with the person. The hard part of it is being comfortable with me, myself. So I desire to let go. I desire to be free, to be healed. I desire to forgive. Or I desire the grace to want to forgive. That's the start, I think. To be able to forgive, that's our Christian life. But to desire it, I want to be a forgiving person, is the start, I think. I want to be that kind of person. I want to be that kind of guy, right? In my case, one of the things that I try to work on, it sounds weird, but one of the things I try to work on is when I celebrate the sacraments, I try to make them accessible to the people, right? You've all had the kind of experience in life, maybe not, but many of us have had the experience in life where it just becomes the thing we do, right? Lord be with you and also with you. Let us pray. I try to do that in a more conscious way because it's important for me to know that I'm making the sacrament, the grace, the ritual, the rite available to people. And by my just reading it off, it doesn't really have the impact that it ought to have. Read a story sometime without any emotion. Once upon a time in a land far, far away. It's quite different. It's when we're able to desire the grace. I want to be a forgiving person, and I'm going to look for ways to do it. And I may not be able to do it 100% of the time. I might only do it 15 or 20% of the time. But I'm moving in the right direction. That's what's important. The arrival is only part of it. The road is the main thing. And continue to dialogue. That will facilitate the next steps. If I continue to talk to people around me, how's it going? If you tell your friends, I noticed that you're nicer now. Are you doing that on purpose? That might be helpful because they're trying to do something, and for you to say it's a good thing is affirming. We all like to be affirmed. We all like to be told that we're good or we did it right or whatever. So how do we do that for other people? To not forgive, or to forgive in a patronizing way, oh, it's okay. What does that say? Oh yeah, you messed up, but it's okay. I don't think that's helpful. I think what we want to do is to say, something happened. Okay. I should aim over there because that's where it is right there. I think it means that we have to be conscious about it. Maybe it's not okay, but I love you anyway. Maybe it's not okay, but I'm still here for you. Maybe it's not okay, but I'm not going to abandon you. That's real rather than, oh, it's okay, which says, I'm not going to notice it. It's not important. We don't have to name it. We don't have to be aware of it or acknowledge it. There's no need to be an adversary. We don't have to be the opposites. We don't have to be us and them. We do that all way too often in society. The us and the them. They do this, we do that, right? The place where that's needed is in football or maybe basketball, right? When I was growing up, my father and I had season tickets for the Oakland Raiders. That was the first time they were in Oakland, and then they left, and then they came back, and then they left again, and now they're gone again. But that's the place to say, I'm a Raider fan. My sister is a 49er fan. My mother is a 49er fan. My father died and left me all alone as a Raider fan. When we accept that we don't have to be adversaries, we can laugh. I can call my nieces who are 49er fans and say, oh, okay, all right, you did it. This year I got to call them and say, oh, close but no cigar, right? That's where being different is helpful because it's fun and it brings about a relationship. It's when we overdo it that it gets to be bad. The need to fear being with the other person. There's no need to fear being with other people who are different. That's half the fun, is that they're different. If everybody was the same, think of how boring it would be. We need some different people so that we can experience the variety of what God has created, of life. Not something we can do through our own efforts. Forgiveness is not totally with us. It's because we're forgiven by God that we forgive other people. We've experienced it. Because we're loved, we can love. Because we're forgiven, we can forgive. It's a grace. But it's also a choice. Because we can say, no, I don't want it. And all too often, I think in our lives, we get in that place where we want to be right, like I was in 7th grade. And it gets in the way of us being the kind of person that we look forward to being. And then there are two indications for forgiveness. Hello? Let's try that. See? It works. Appreciation. How do we appreciate the fact that because we see it, know it, accept it, acknowledge it, talk about it, that we're accepted? Right? We're accepted. Have you ever had that experience? Have you ever really messed something up, and then when you talk to people about it, they say, it's okay. You can do better. It's okay. We love you anyway. Have you been on the receiving side of that? Have you been on the giving side of that? Parents do it all the time with kids, right? Kids mess up, and parents go, all right, let's start from scratch and let's try to be better next time. That's this appreciation for the forgiveness. Because we've offered it and because it's been accepted, because someone's offered it to us and we've accepted it, there's an appreciation that comes with it. Not being a victim. It's okay because fortunately there's value in that. The value is, no matter how messed up my life is at times, and sometimes it is, things happen, no matter how much of that happens, we can choose. We can choose to say, yeah, I need to do better, and so let me pay attention. Let me do that differently. Let me change that thing. I can tell you, as a presenter, as a professor at a seminary, as a psychologist, I've made plenty of mistakes. Most often on slides where the words are spelled wrong, and then I'm the one grading the paper of the student and trying to correct their grammar, right? So I'm like, I need to be a little forgiving because I make mistakes too, right? We can see growth. We can experience growth. We can experience change. We can experience something different because of forgiveness and appreciate that. Jesus' promise of the cross to his followers. Jesus didn't say, tell you what, guys and gals, I went through it. I'm headed back to the Father. I went through it so you don't have to. That's not what he said. He said, you're going to suffer the same way I suffered. Be ready. Our lives aren't perfect because we're always in the process of getting better. We're always in the process of becoming more and more like Christ, more and more configured to who Christ was, a person of healing and compassion and forgiveness. Then a difficult part of integrating. How do we take those experiences into ourselves of forgiveness and acceptance and integrate those into who we are? How do we integrate that struggle of the half a hot dog during Lent into who we are and our understanding of ourselves? How do we make our faith our own? I mentioned yesterday that one of the things I did 40 years ago or more was I changed the words of the Our Father for myself. Because thy and thou is simply not the way I speak on a daily basis. And so I changed it from thy and thou to your. Our Father art in heaven, hallowed be your name. Because it makes more sense to my daily experience than other words that don't do that for me. I'm not saying you should get rid of the thys and thous. I'm saying be conscious of, is it working for you? And if it does, if it gives you a sense of the mystical, the prayer, fine. Not a problem. I've changed it because for me, I want to be more authentic in the moment. Yeah, I'm one of those 60s kids, Authenticity. When I turned 30, I couldn't trust myself anymore because you can't trust people over 30. You remember those days? Yeah. I wanted to be more authentic, and I said, this is how I'm going to become more authentic in my life, in my work. And so, integration. It moves us from appreciation to action. It moves us from just that interior, it feels good when people accept me for who I am, even though I sometimes make mistakes. In moving from that to action, how do I act that out? How do I do that for other people? How do I do that in my life for others? How am I that kind of person to my classmates? Being violated and finding new life. Being hurt in relationships. Not being heard by others. And yet, moving on to become a caring, charitable, loving, compassionate person. It's because we acknowledge, because we forgive, because we appreciate that forgiveness that we're able to integrate it into ourselves and how we live out our Christian lives. Feeling at one, feeling whole. There's a new energy to it. If you've ever gone on a retreat and thought about how is my relationship with God doing, you've experienced a new energy. At the end of the retreat, there's kind of like a, whew, just got out of the cold pool ready for the warm weather, There's a certain energy to that. How can we maintain that energy? Because we're consistently trying to be loving, caring, compassionate people. The mysterious. We're different than society. This is what society hands us values, and we have to look at them and say, is it going to fit in my Christian faith? Or do we just say, those are the values of the world, must be ours? Because we can look in Scripture and find the values of the world aren't necessarily the values we want to follow. By nature, we want to act. By nature, we want to take what we've learned and move it forward into action. So, we've gone from awareness to acknowledgement to acceptance to appreciation to action. Action without the burden of being a victim. Action of belief, of trust. We no longer need to be unforgiving. We no longer need to hold on to that, I'm not going to forgive you. I'm not going to let it be. It only hurts us. It doesn't hurt anybody else. I can tell you my experiences, the people in my life who have hurt me, and I'm the one holding on to it, it's not affecting them. They're off somewhere else doing their own thing. It's only when I give it up that it becomes forgiveness, that it becomes acceptance, that I can integrate, just like Jesus. They don't know what they've done. And resurrection. Compassion. Living in our own actions. Sometimes our actions may look meek. They may look mild. They may look like, we're weak or something. But in actuality, they're confrontational. I simply choose not to live by that eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. I don't want those values to be the values that I live by. I want the values that I live by to be Christian values, Jesus' words, Jesus' message. And that's a message of compassion. Maybe then we're ready for reconciliation. Maybe after all this, we're ready to go to the reconciliation booth, to confession, and we're ready to be real about it. Because we've become aware of our faults and failings. We've acknowledged them. We've accepted them. We've appreciated the forgiveness. And now we're going to action. Let me share with you a story about action. Action in faith. How that works. So I got to find it first. Now there was a woman suffering from a hemorrhage for 12 years, whom no one had been able to cure. She came up behind Jesus and touched the fringe of his cloak, and the hemorrhage stopped at that instant. Jesus said, "Who touched me?" When they all denied that they had, Peter and his companions said, "Master, it is the crowds around you pushing." But Jesus said, "Somebody touched me. I felt that power had gone out of me." Seeing herself discovered, the woman came forward trembling and falling at his feet, explained in front of all the people why she had touched him and how she had been cured at that moment. "My daughter," he said, "your faith has restored you to health. Go in peace." She didn't walk up to him and say, "Excuse me, sir, I've heard you're a healer, and I have this problem, and I've gone to that doctor, and this doctor, and this doctor, and that doctor, and everybody, and nobody's been able." She knew that simply touching the edge of his gown, she was going to be healed. Her faith told her, this is the action I need to take in order to change this medical diagnosis, in order to change this sickness. Do we have enough faith to know that if we simply touch the garment, we're going to be better? Or do we need the introduction? "Hi, my name's Jesus. How are you?" Right? What are we capable of doing? Might we be ready? Might our faith be strong enough? There's a famous book by Henry Nouwen called The Wounded Healer, and it's a really interesting look at how a person who's wounded can also be one who heals. If you think about doctors, they're human. They have a lot of knowledge, but they're human, right? So they have diagnoses just like anybody else does. But they're able to heal even though they're wounded. With sensitivity and creativity, not possible before. When we recognize our woundedness and we can appreciate the woundedness of another, that's when we can truly be. That's when we can truly offer a healing, a forgiveness, an appreciation. Because it's honest. It's inside of us. Acts with compassion, not compulsion. When we come to Mass, we come with compassion. We don't come because, oh, if I don't go to Mass, I'm going to go to hell. Right? To go to Mass because I want to avoid hell is probably an okay reason, but it's not really the reason we ought to go. We ought to go because it somehow is fulfilling, right? What would it be like to go to Grandma's house for Christmas and say, Grandma, I'm only here because my parents wanted me to be here, but otherwise I didn't want to come? Who does that? I know it's not any of you. How do we do that authentically? Not because it's compulsive, but because it's compassionate. It's who I want to be. I want to be that kind of person. There's a famous quote from Alice Miller. Now, I put it in here, but I was unable to find the book that it came from. So if you want to look it up, you're going to have to look up Alice Miller and research a little bit. But her quote really kind of stuck with me, and that is that every violent person has been in a violent situation. We learn by the things that we're involved in, okay? By going to school, we learn lots of things. We learn math, we learn history, we learn science, we learn lots of things. But because of where we've been in our lives, there is learning in that that's valuable to us. And every person who's learned to be violent has learned it in some place, some situation in their lives. There we go. There are assumptions of this process that I've just gone through, okay? If you take a look, there are assumptions built in there. Some of those assumptions are that it's a process, not an event. We're going to have to revisit it. Just because we recognize the things that have gone on in our life doesn't mean we can say, okay, that's over with. Because we're going to have to revisit it again because there's something else to learn from that as we get older and older. Right? We're not going to learn it all at 12. We're going to learn some of it at 60 or 50. 40. Yeah. We're going to learn some of it later. It's a grace. And it feels like receiving a gift. We get excited about, I've learned something new and I've tried it out and it worked. I've learned something new about how to be a Christian and I've tried it out and it feels pretty good. Now, keeping to doing that thing, doing it again, being aware, being conscious of it, is important. Likely, it's cyclic. Likely, we're going to have to visit these events in our lives, positive and negative events, again, to look for the meaning, to look for the consequence to us. And we're going to have to process them in Lent, interiorly. So we integrate all the possible ways God is speaking to us. Community, spiritual direction, all of those things are helpful to us. And the process helps us also in ministry. As I draw close to the end, I want to share one final scripture passage that was helpful to me in looking at this healing of memories idea. And that is the following. Philip said, Lord, let us see the Father, and then we shall be sanctified. And Jesus said, have I been with you all this time, Philip, and you still do not know me? God's been with us all this time. What are we doing this Lent to look at how God has spoken through our experiences in life? How God has spoken through the experiences of those around us who have shared their experience with us? How during this Lent do we prepare ourselves for Easter? Hopefully the process is contagious. Hopefully in the process of looking at our memories and the things that have happened and trying to mine from those understanding about how to be better Christian people, we live in a better way and others see it. And over time, because it's a process, we are renewed. A very blessed Lenten season to all of you. Thank you. We got a few minutes left for questions if you have questions. Yeah.
Father, I was wondering how, in this more time with these students,
Yeah.
there's more multimedia
Oh, yeah.
that's involved,
Oh, yeah.
and it really affects how their psyche
Oh, yeah.
is amenable to all of this discussion that you provided.
Yeah.
How do they overcome?
I think by being cautious in social media, by being cautious in the choices we make, what do I buy into? And it's hard when you're young. When I was young, I kind of believed what my friends said. There's all those wonderful conversations that happen where your friends tell you something you didn't already know, and you go, okay, that must be right. The problem is sometimes, no. Sometimes my friends can think something and tell me something that may not be the right way to go, and I have to be careful. I have to be aware and say, I'm not so sure. It doesn't sound quite right. Let me rethink that. Let me talk to other trusted people, whether it's your parents, your teacher, your youth minister, your coach, whatever. Let me talk to other trusted people and see whether that's their understanding of the world. And social media is it's basically the wild, wild west when it comes to information, misinformation, half information, all of that stuff, But I think being cautious, if you want to be a good Christian man or woman, you look through the eyes of Christ. Do I think that this information, this thing, is leading me closer to Christ in some way? My understanding of science leads me closer to Christ. Now, the theologians I work with would say, Brian, it's not science, it's theology, right? The biblical scholars would say, Brian, it's not science, it's scripture studies. But from my personal life and reflecting on where I've been and what I've gotten, how does this new piece of information, dialogue, relationship, how does that bring me closer to God? How does that in some way draw me into a better relationship with God? Social media is just really tough to crack that egg. And I'm not sure. I wish I had step 1, step 2, step 3 with social media, but I don't. I have plenty of social media because of the work I do. I want to understand when people talk about it. So I have a Facebook, a Twitter, an Insta, a Snap. I had a MySpace, but that kind of died. Twitch. So I have a lot. And I try to look at it from the perspective of what's happening here. Watching gamers on Twitch is a very instructive exercise because it tells you something about what 20-somethings do. Definitely their vocabulary is different than mine, right? But it tells me something about where that generation is and how to work with that generation. If you're in it, you just have to be cautious about it, I think. And as parents, to be cautious about saying, it's not a terrible thing, but it's a thing that can really give you wrong information. So let's look at it together and let's think about it.
This would probably be a whole other lecture, but when you talk about forgiveness, sometimes people, especially young people, might be caught in a situation where another person is continually being abusive or,
Yeah,
and so, can you just address
yeah,
what what's the difference
right.
between
Forgiveness, when I'm talking about forgiveness, I'm not talking about it's okay. That's kind of that superficial piece of, yeah, I'm feeling bad, but it's okay. No, it's not okay that you feel bad. It tells you something about the relationship. And so maybe one of the important things in that relationship is for you to dialogue, to accept, to acknowledge, but to talk to somebody about, I don't feel good in this relationship with this person or that situation because how can you help me sort through that because I'm only 12? That could be a parent, it could be a coach, it could be a priest, it could be anybody. But to choose, who do I trust enough to talk about those things with, knowing they might have more life experience or they might have more knowledge, that they could help me think through what's the best course of action with regard to that. I'm not saying that forgiving at the superficial level of it's okay is what's happening. Forgiveness is really, I think, more an adult concept that there are things that have happened that I'm holding on to and carrying around with me that I need to get rid of because I'm not going to change them. I can't change the past. I can't change that person's way of speaking at the moment or over time. And so I'm going to forgive and move on. And it means I may distance because that relationship is an abusive one. But I'm not giving up on that person. I'm simply distancing as a protective measure, right? Dialogue is the important thing, I think, for young people. Finding people in your life that you can trust to talk to, who listen, who don't just say, oh, no, but who listen and say, okay, well, what can you do? What are the choices you have? Who can we talk to? How can we keep you safe? Those people are going to be important when you're young. When you're older, those people are going to be important, but they may be your age. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, I don't mean forgiveness in that kind of superficial way. Okay?
One last one from me. The whole concept of acceptance,
Yeah,
even in the negative, is
right.
talked about accepting yourself. Unfortunately, in my experience, I've had young people who accepted the negative so much that they
Mm-hmm.
it turned to dread.
Yeah.
And how do we overcome
Right. By acceptance, I don't mean, again, I don't mean accept the negative, accept, it's okay, it's okay. I mean, accept that that's the reality because then I can act. Let me go back a couple. Hello, did I turn you off? I did. There we go. It's only, accepting is before appreciation. I accept that that's reality, and now what do I do with it? Right? Yes, it's abusive. Yes, for a long time when I was younger, I couldn't really talk about my father's alcoholism. It just seemed like nobody really wants to know, and it's not because my father was the kind of guy who was, we don't talk about that. I felt like it wasn't appropriate for me to do that. As I've gotten older, and I've realized the part it played in my becoming who I am, both in good ways and bad ways, I talk about it freely because it really is something that is pivotal in who I've become over the years. By accepting and appreciating that, not because it was a good thing, but accepting and appreciating it for the role it had in forming me, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. I'm not talking about acceptance. It's bad and I just need to stay here and turn the other cheek. I don't think that's what God's saying at all. If it's bad, you need to accept it. It is real. That is what's happening. It is my experience. But now the action becomes, how do I deal with that in a positive way? How do I distance from it? How do I dialogue about it? And appreciate it for what it is, a sign that something is going on in my life that is pivotal, that it means I need to change. For me, the change came actually, I was about 16, and I knew my father's work and his bosses and all of that. And one morning, my dad said, after a night of drinking, he said, I'm not going to go to work. Can you call my boss and tell him that I'm sick? And I said, Dad, I don't want to do that. He said, call my boss and tell him. Okay. The phone was in Dad's room. So you have to imagine the bed. Dad's at the far end. I'm at this end. I pick up the phone and I call. I get his boss, Roger, and I say, Roger, my dad's not going to be into work today because he's hungover. And my father just about jumped out of the bed. So I guess, well, maybe he had more energy than I thought. What it did is change his asking me to do that, to lie. Because when he said, why did you say that? I told him, because you taught me not to lie. And the reality is you're making choices, and they're choices that you have to deal with. I was 16. From that point forward, things were different because he didn't expect me to participate in the negativity. He knew that I wouldn't at that point. He knew that I was going to tell truth, and he didn't want to know. So it changed the relationship between my father and I, probably in ways I'll never understand, but it changed because I accepted it. That is reality. I appreciated what it meant, and I took appropriate action. Roger, he's hungover, he's not going to be there. Roger's response was, okay, I understand, tell him to get well. Because Roger knew just like I knew. But it changed the dynamic because I accepted it. I was aware of it, I accepted it, and I appreciated the role that played in my being an honest, straightforward person, rather than we all have to lie for Dad, right? Yeah. All right. I was told at 10:30 I had to end. Go about your day. Have a wonderful day, everyone. 7th, 8th, 6th, older folks.